Season 2024 is well underway now, so here's our best champions for you guys to main for every single role. Now we aren't just going to go for picks that are crazy OP and abusable, and instead we're covering several reasons why a champion might be worth maining. So what are these reasons? Well, first off, we want champions to be somewhat meta resistant. We just don't want to go for picks that are either permanently banned or picks that are basically just ignored by balance updates either. So a nice mix of somewhere in the middle is ideal. We also want these picks to feel rewarding. We want picks to have a high skill expression, meaning we can really feel ourselves improving on these champions with time, learning limit testing, combos, animations, mechanics, and of course playstyles and matchups too. That's not to say that champions on the easier side aren't worth playing, as some champions in this list are easier than others. But we just want to make sure that they are actually worth the time investment and you can really feel yourself getting better with 10, 50, 100 or even 1,000 games played. Plus the new mastery system update is coming into the game soon, meaning the more mastery you have, the more you're going to be rewarded and the more you can show off to all of your friends. So having 10 million mastery points on Yumi, for example, might not quite be something you want to go around telling everybody. Now to piggyback onto that last point, we also need these champions to actually be enjoyable too. Because let's be honest, picking a champion and learning them just because they are effective just really isn't that much fun. And we are playing a video game, so it's supposed to be fun, right? Finally, we've also selected these champions to be strong at most ranks across the board. Now there are probably some exceptions with some more complicated choices here that will be more popular at higher ranks, and of course vice versa. But either way, once you have put the time into these champions, you should be able to perform and carry in pretty much all ranks. So now let's get into it, and of course we're going to have to start with the top lane. And our first champion to talk about today is Fiora. Fiora is the definition of a champion that just ticks all of these boxes. She's been such a consistent top lane choice for season upon season, surviving various different metas and always being viable in the right hands. Fiora isn't the most difficult champion to learn in the first place, but she does have a very high skill ceiling, with various combos, perfectly timed ripostes, and being able to dart around and one-shot enemies by popping all 4 vitals on her ultimate. Like most top lane champions, Fiora does have a few more difficult matchups, but there's still ways she can overcome them. Whether that's just abandoning the lane phase and forcing a side lane against a different champion instead, or actually just learning when you can outplay and punish enemies' misplays in those bad matchups to beat them anyway. Fiora has tons of great item options so far in season 2024, and historically she's had some of the biggest build diversity over recent seasons, with the standard Hydra builds, or you can go for more burst damage, or you can even go for Stride Breaker press attack with Blade of the Ruin King. There's always been loads of different weird and wonderful builds to get your head around on Fiora, so the more time you play her, the more you experiment with those builds, the more you experiment with those items and matchups and combos and mechanics, you will quickly understand just why Fiora is such a great champion to main in season 2024. Up next, we have to follow Fiora with the king of the tanks, Ornn. Now Ornn is one of the most rewarding tanks you can play in the game. He has one of the best ultimates in the game for setting up engaging fights with a long range initiation. Ornn is one of those champions that fits into absolutely any team comp you throw him into, and he will always be useful no matter how far ahead or far behind you become. Now it starts off in the lane phase with his ability to set up ganks so easily for his jungler. He also doesn't have to base as often as other top laners because of his passive allowing him to buy items from the in-game shop from the lane. There's a lot to like about Ornn, from the big CC wombo combos to just being really consistent in general. And he's such a great champion to have in your top lane champion pool. If you don't really know what to pick, just pick Ornn. If your team needs a tank, just pick Ornn. If you need to play weak side and survive the early game, just pick Ornn. Or if you've got a really aggressive jungler and you need some CC from the top lane to get them super fed, pick Ornn. Next up we've got Camille, and ever since her release she's always been one of the best champions you can main in the top lane. And in this new season it's still as true as ever. Now if you are good enough at Camille, you can climb through any ranks. You can carry any uncarryable teammates and you can win any unwinnable games. Because Camille really does have it all. She's got mobility, she's got CC, she's got fantastic trading power, incredible burst, and amazing isolation and assassination with that ultimate too. The one thing you have to learn most about Camille more than anything else when playing her is simply her matchups. If you know how to play a specific matchup on Camille, there's always a way to win it. But you also do need to know which matchups just aren't worth the effort. There's a few difficult lanes that Camille has always struggled with, but apart from those really specific matchups, she is such a versatile and consistent top laner to play. Now if you do get fed on Camille, the enemy carries and squishies have to absolutely respect you, because if they forget about you for 1 minute, you can bounce off those walls, spring in behind them and press your ultimate to lock them into a 1v1 that they simply will not win. Speaking of winning, if you want to win a lot of games and you want to feel the real value of mastering a champion, then look no further than Riven. Riven is and has always been the ultimate one-trick pony top lane champion to carry with, and so far so good this season, as Riven looks to be one of the most terrifying champions to come up against. Riven really does have it all when it comes to time investment into your champion, with the animation and cancelling combos and mechanics and the insanely high skill ceiling that follows this as well. Riven is all about limit testing. It's about understanding your damage with each and every item you complete and knowing how much damage you can deal when you dash in and try to kill your enemies. Because if you misplay this or mistime this, you will get CC'd, locked up and killed very quickly. But if you use your dashes to dodge that CC, you use your Q to jump over walls to get to your enemy and burst them down with your W and R, and you perfectly weave in those auto attacks around your passive to maximize your damage, you will feel like an absolute beast. Now all of that was just a taste of how complex Riven can be in the right hands. And to add to this, not only does she have a high skill ceiling and is she extremely rewarding, but she's really not banned that often. So if you main Riven, you can play her all year round. And in season 2024, she's looking like a great choice to go for. Now finally, in the top lane, we've got Singed as our final pick. And not only does he have a completely different playstyle to anyone else in the top lane, but pretty much has a completely different playstyle to anyone else in the game. Singed is all about proxying waves, running away from enemies rather than into them, but also a bit of a combination of the two, locking them down with their W, flinging them around with their E, and watching and laughing as enemies die to the damage over time. Singed is all about frustrating and trolling his enemies by running around in circles and dealing crazy damage over time. But in order to pull this off, you need to get through the lane phase with a decent experience and CS lead without trading too often, because your trading power isn't really very good. Now apart from the fact that Singed has a peculiar playstyle, this doesn't take away from his ability to carry games. Because once you get strong on this champion, you become impossibly difficult to deal with, as you can press your ghost and your ultimate, sprint towards enemy backlines, fling those carries straight into your own teammates and enjoy yourself as they all burn to death. Singed has been strong for so many seasons now, and he's never banned, so he really is the definition of meta resistant. He's also incredibly fun to play, as what's not to like just spamming your laugh emotes whilst you run around in circles and end up winning the game. GG, well played. Yes, we are into the jungle now, and starting off with one of the scariest champions in the game, it's Nocturne. Now Nocturne does have a bit of a higher ban rate than some of the other champions on this list, but there are plenty of games where he slips through the draft. Now everybody that plays League of Legends probably already knows what Nocturne is good at, and it's mostly revolved around his global ultimate. He doesn't really have to worry about wards, he full clears really easily, gets level 6 and then just presses his R to swoop into a lane and instantly cause havoc very early into a game. Now if you want to main Nocturne, learning him is not the most difficult part, but really it's learning how to maximize your jungle tempo and keep your presence on the map constantly rather than just being invisible when your ultimate's down. Learning Nocturne's various itemization builds depending on the draft is also a big thing, as there's some games you want to go full glass cannon and there's other games where you need to just be a bit of a bruiser. Then it's all about learning his limits, learning how much damage he does with certain items like various champions in this video, but also learning how to perfectly time those spell shields in certain matchups and how to maximize your impact on the game no matter what draft you're in. Nocturne has had a pretty strong start to season 2024 so far, so if you haven't already been playing him, he's a great jungler to have in your arsenal this patch. Next up we have Zac, and he was pretty OP in PBE with the initial changes, but then he wasn't that great on release and now he's really starting to get good again. You can play him in top lane and jungle, but of course we're in the jungle section, so we're going to talk about why he's good here and why he's a great jungler to main this season. Now similar to Nocturne, obviously it's not his ultimate, but he has one of the best abilities in the game for long range and unconventional gank paths. Once you've got a few levels into Zac Z, his gank range is immense, and he is one of the best junglers in the game to punish lanes that don't have their summoner spells. You have a bunch of CC with your E and your Q and your ultimate once you're level 6, and it all just means you are an absolute nuisance to play against, especially against champions that have low mobility. Now Zac, just like Nocturne, is pretty easy to pick up and learn. He's not too complicated once you get the hang of his basic kit, but you can definitely tell the difference between a good Zac and an average one. There's loads of different combos you can do, there's various ways to use your Q, you can use it on minions and champions and jungle plants, and it's safe to say the more time you spend on Zac, the more you will learn about him. Since Zac's release, he has had a fair few changes, but in the recent seasons he's remained a really consistent jungler to go for. He has patches where he's a lot stronger and he has patches where he's a little bit more average, but definitely still playable, especially if you are good enough on him. So if you pick up Zac into your champion pool and you see a very immobile bot lane, just start camping them on repeat, get super fed and enjoy the free win. Next up in the jungle we have Viego. Now Viego is very different to any other champion in the game, with his unique passive allowing him to take over and possess a dead champion's soul. And when he does this, he can take control of that champion for a few seconds, takes all their items and all their basic abilities too. So first up, before you even go any further, if you want to main Viego, you probably need to be a bit of a demon in ARAM. Yes, learning Viego really is all about having a massive amount of game knowledge. And if you're a new player looking for a jungler to main, this is going to be probably the most confusing pick of the lot. If you've been playing this game for a long time and you know how every champion works and you've played a fair amount of them though, he's a fantastic pick in the jungle. Now maining Viego is of course knowing all those other champions, but it's also understanding how he actually functions. And his job is simply to dive onto one target with his teammates or alone, assassinate them, and then simply start resetting his way through teams. Viego is a bit of a pentakill demon, so if you want a new jungle pick to show off to your friends with crazy resets and easy pentakills, start maining Viego. Next up we have Fiddlesticks, and it's safe to say he hasn't had the strongest start to season 2024, but his time will definitely come and he's definitely still playable in the right hands. He is slowly but surely starting to rise back up those jungle tiers. Now people are realizing and figuring out how to play him and how to itemize him this season. But with that aside, we all know what Fiddlesticks is good at, and it's all about his ultimate. Now learning and maining Fiddlesticks is a bit of a job because you need to understand how to efficiently clear the jungle, because it's a bit different to other junglers. You also need to know all about your passive effigies and how you can use them to control vision, and how to bait enemies and confuse them and even waste summoner spells. And then on top of all of that, you need to understand and perfect Fiddlesticks' playstyle, which is all about getting in those obscure angles and ulting into teams out of vision and destroying them with 5-man Crowstorms. Fiddlesticks does take a lot of practice to understand this playstyle fully, but his ability to carry when you understand it is simply insane. You could be pretty behind, you could be losing most of the game, but one good ultimate on a Baron pit or a Dragon pit, or even just somewhere in the middle of a lane that you come out of the jungle for, you can turn the tables of any fight, you can deal tons of damage, you can CC entire teams, and you can really make the difference with this pick. Fiddlesticks is definitely nowhere near as popular this season so far as he has been in recent seasons, but those one tricks are still having some good success, so give him a go. Our fifth and final jungler to main this season just has to be Bel'Veth. Now Bel'Veth has been one of the best junglers in the game since her release. She goes through some patches where she's not quite as good, but most of the time she's up there with the big guns in the S tier. Bel'Veth is another champion that is fairly easy to pick up and learn. You've got your Qs in different directions, your passive to space out your auto attacks, and you get the hang of how to use this to clear the jungle and to get around the map pretty easily. But then you look at the rest of her kit and that's when she really comes into fruition. She's got her W's knock up for a bit of CC, and of course her E's massive damage reduction, which if you use it at the right time when enemies have no CC, you will simply stay alive longer than you ever thought you could. And then of course you've got those void corals which you can consume to deal huge AoE damage, and of course upgrade yourself into that OP form too. Bel'Veth has a lot to offer, and if you main her, you need to have a good understanding of jungling in general, jungle tempo, maximizing your clear, but you also have so many things that are just so appealing as a jungler. You simply melt through objectives like dragons and barons, but also because of those little voidlings, you also melt through structures too, like towers and inhibitors. And once you've got a few items on board, you start flapping those wings and you start destroying carries in a matter of seconds. So if you do want to main Bel'Veth, there's not too much to think about. Play her a few times, learn the jungle, learn how she plays, learn what she's good at, and you will definitely reap the rewards this season. Well, that's the jungle covered, and now it's time for all of you mid lane mains. And our first champion recommendation to main this season is going to be Viktor. Now first things first, one of the great things about maining Viktor right now is that simply no one is really playing him, but that doesn't mean he's not a great choice to go for. Viktor is the ultimate scaling utility control mage, and he always has been, and no matter what the meta, he is always a great pick to whip out when it's the right game for him. Now we're not going to go into every single different matchup because that's what you're going to need to learn when you main him, but once you understand which matchups you can play him in, which drafts he excels in, you will quickly realize just how underrated this champion is. Viktor has everything you need from that mid lane control mage. He has fantastic wave clear, good catch potential, great mobility with his movement speed from his shield, oh yeah, plus a shield, and then of course he has that massive AoE damage and devastation with his ultimate. Now if you want to main Viktor, one of the biggest things you need to get the hang of is his E. Yes, his death rate is one of his main forms of burst and poke. and it's a bit of a unique skill shot, kind of like a Rumble ultimate if you've played him before. But once you get the hang of it, it's one of the most difficult things for enemies to dodge. Honestly, I think this is one of the hardest skill shots in the game to dodge. I don't know why, it just always has been for me. Then we get onto items as well, and Victor's always had loads of different options as well because of the way his kit works with his upgraded abilities. For example, Lichbane is insane with his Q burst auto attacks. So understanding and maining and learning Victor is all about understanding which items you can build in different matchups too. If you're one of those players that loves committing to a champion and exploring their items, exploring their matchups, and really investing time into them, then I would honestly say Victor is up there with some of the best choices you can go for. Now next up we have a bit of a similar champion to Victor, but one that's not been around for quite so long, and it's Hui. Now some of you might think I'm trolling a little bit for suggesting Hui because his win rate hasn't been that impressive this season so far, but it's safe to say that Riot want this guy in their games because he keeps getting buff after buff after buff. So trust me, if you spend the time, resources and effort to learn this guy now, then by the time his time to shine comes through, you're going to be so prepared that you're going to be better at him than anyone else will. But anyway, aside from that, he's actually a really good pick at the moment anyway, if you know how to play him, if you know how to build him, and you know when to pick him. Now if you've read Hui's abilities or if you've played him once already, you'll know how high his skill ceiling is already. He's got more abilities than most champions, but actually if you break it down, he can only use one Q, one W or one E at a time. So it's not like he can go QQ, QW and QE all in one combo. Learning and maining and mastering Hui does take a bit of time because you need to know when to use which ability at the right times. But to put it really simply, his ultimate damage, his AoE poke, his long range artillery damage is crazy. And all you gotta do is basically get through the lane phase and scale as quickly as you can, because the damage you offer once you've got those items is insane. Next up, we've got a bit of a different pick in the mid lane to those we've just talked about, and it's one that's having a great season so far. It's Twisted Fate. Yes, the OG card master, one of the coolest champions in the game in my opinion from when I first picked this game up all those years ago. And right now he is in a fantastic spot for you to play him. Now Twisted Fate has always been a great champion to main because of that global presence he has with his ultimate. He can impact games instantly as soon as he gets level 6 with that ultimate, teleporting to lanes and locking enemies down with his gold cards. He brings great wave clear, he brings great catch potential and great scaling throughout games too, because not only does he have that burst and pit potential, but he's also great in side lane split pushing too, because if he gets into any trouble, he just presses R and goes back to safety. Now if you look at Twisted Fate's items right now, they all give him movement speed, which means he sprints around the map, lobbing those gold cards at people and destroying them in a matter of seconds. So if you do want to main Twisted Fate, it's all about learning how to use his W's pick a card perfectly, getting those gold cards secured really early on without having to wait several rotations before you press W again. And of course, keeping yourself alive at the same time because you are exceptionally squishy and very prone to burst. But once you get the hang of him, he will be a great choice to main. He's instantly rewarding and you will feel like an absolute beast when you're carrying games with that ultimate. Our fourth pick to go for in the mid lane is finally an AD champion, and it's Akshan. Now Akshan has been a fantastic pick in both the solo lanes since his release because he just has so much to offer. And as long as they know what they're doing, Akshan players are always great to have on your team because they can revive you and get you back into the action as long as they kill the right target. Now despite having a passive that can revive his whole team, he also has so much else to offer. He's got stealth for fantastic roaming, he's got swinging around resets to get in and out of fights with his E, he's got solid early game damage and poke to snowball, and long range executing sniping abilities too with his ultimate. Now one of the reasons Akshan is such a great champion to main is just how rewarding he is when you pull him off and play him perfectly. Swinging into a team fight with a good flank and executing that carry that's just killed your whole team is such a good feeling, seeing all of your teammates come back to life in the fountain. One of the hardest things about Akshan is actually playing him well enough in the late game team fights. Now in the lane phase, if you get a good matchup, it's pretty easy to bully enemies and win the early game. But what really separates the good Akshans and makes them shine the most is how hard they carry in those team fights, because all it takes is one bit of CC for them to drop. But if you are the kind of player that loves that assassin-y kind of playstyle, swinging in, swinging out, getting the job done and carrying your teammates, then look no further than Akshan. Our fifth and final mid lane champion to main this season just has to be Neeko. Ever since she got that rework that made her playstyle so much more mischievous, she has continued to be one of the best champions to play in the mid lane, honestly ever since that update. And one of the main reasons why you should main Neeko is just how much fun it is to sneak up back to lane camouflaged as a minion before you one-shot them, or pretending to be a ward in a late game teamfight before you jump out and surprise enemies with a 5-man ultimate. Neeko has a ton to offer in any draft, with huge AoE damage and engage, and tons of different ways to outplay her enemies with her W's and tricks and everything else that comes along with it. So now we're out of the mid lane and we're going to move down to the bot lane, and of course we're going to start off with those AD carries. And first off, we have the most aggressive snowballing AD carry in the game. It's Draven. Maining Draven is a task in itself because he is very difficult to master. Now obviously it starts out with being able to micromanage his axes perfectly and keep them spinning to maximize your damage. But he's also quite risky to pull off when it comes to team fighting and positioning, because he's extremely squishy as he's an AD carry, but he's also not got the biggest range in the game. So it's all about maintaining those axes but also getting in close enough to deal damage without being popped at the same time. But when you've put the time and effort into Draven, you can snowball and carry games 1v9 so much easier than any other AD carry in the game. And it really is all down to his passive giving him so much extra gold and cashing in on it once he gets kills after catching a ton of axes. Draven can seem like a lot of effort to learn, but the truth is if you really want to carry from the bot lane and you really want to get those hours into a champion and feel the rewards of it, then Draven is one of the best choices you can go for. And in season 2024 so far, he's dealing a lot of damage. Our next AD carry is Twitch, and he's one that has a very unique mechanic with his stealth and his tendency to jump out of stealth with his ultimate and ambush teams with huge AoE damage. Now Twitch doesn't have the best early game in the world. You do have to be careful of those aggressive lanes that can shove you in and prevent you from actually scaling, but once you hit those 1 and 2 and 3 item power spikes, you can space glide your way through teams, pop your ghost, pop your ultimate, and start deleting them, and also feel like a complete badass at the same time. Maining Twitch is all about finding a lead through cheesing into lanes with your Q stealth and basically snowballing from that point onwards. In season 2024 so far, Twitch has a bunch of different items to go for as well. You've got that classic combination of Blade into Rune Arts, but after that you can go crit base with i.e. Kraken Slayer and Nord Doms, or you can go for a bit more of a tanky on hit build with Terminus and Wit's End. And if all of that fails, you've also got AP Twitch too. So maining Twitch is all about understanding when and how and which builds to go for depending on the draft and depending on what your team needs. If you do main Twitch, you can also pick him with a bunch of different supports too. He works well with aggressive engaging supports, but he really does come to life with those enchanters like Lulu, Nami, Melio, and of course Yuumi too. So if you like that cheesy stealthy playstyle and you like popping out and ambushing teams with huge 1v5 damage, Twitch is a great choice to make. If you're unsure about all those weird and wonderful build options, then don't forget to download Mobalytics and check out Twitch's build page. Here you can see all the different ways to build him, from the AD on hit, the AD crit, or even the AP Hail of Blade setup. So just click import to client to get the runes in Champion Select and the builds in your shop in-game. Our third AD carry to main in season 2024 is Vale. Now if you do want to show off to your friends with kiting and spacing and everything else that's beautiful about playing AD carry in the late game, then Vale really is the perfect pick for you. She has always famously had a bit of a rough time in the early game, although this season she's not doing too bad so far, and to be honest she has a bunch of different ways you can build and play her, much like Twitch, although I wouldn't advise going AP Vale. So you can go lethal tempo with the classic AD on hit build with Blade, Gwynsu's and Terminus. You can also use press the attack with a similar setup, or you can even go for a fleet footward poking Q maxing burst build that plays around Storm Razor and Essence Reaver to Q in and poke your enemies down with auto attacks. And of course if you need it, you've also got Static Shiv for wave clear too. But whichever way you decide to build Vale, maining her is all about perfecting her kiting with her Q stealth inside her ultimate. It's about chasing and weaving in and out of fights, dealing tons of single target damage, and of course keeping yourself alive at the same time. Now Vale of course is not quite as blind pickable as some other AD carries like Ezreal, but we'll get onto him later. But if you manage to lock in Vale in the perfect game against a bunch of tanks with a great support and an easy matchup bot lane, she's definitely still up there with the best champions in the bot lane for you to main. Now in the number 4 spot for AD carries, of course, it's going to have to be Jhin. And what a season 2024 he's having so far. With the lethality meta in full swing, especially so in the bot lane, Jhin is one of the perfect choices to really capitalize on this, as his current Yumu's Ghostblade Intercollector build is just so damn strong. Maining Jhin mostly is all about learning his damage limits. It's about knowing how to bully lanes with Qs and fourth shots, and then sniping enemies down with your W and your ultimate. He doesn't have any dashes, but those inbuilt movement speed steroids are what really makes you dance around fights, execute enemies, and keep yourself alive too. Jhin has been one of the most consistent AD carries for you to play for the last few seasons. Well, to be honest, ever since his release really. He goes through those phases where he's a little bit broken, but he always remains relevant even if the meta doesn't suit him. He's also seriously fun to play, and the more you play him, the more you will understand his limits, his little tricks and tips and combos, and before you know it, you'll be one-tricking him all the way to master. Speaking of one-tricking an AD carry, our fifth and final choice just has to be Ezreal. One of my personal favourite champions in the game to play. He has tons of skill shots, he has great kiting and spacing and amazing mobility with his E. And I can safely say if you're looking for a champion that feels incredibly rewarding to put tons of time into, Ezreal is a fantastic choice. So Ezreal isn't quite as meta resistant as some of the other AD carries in this video, because as we saw from the start of season 2024, he was a little bit on the weaker side, but now after a few buffs, he's back up there with the big guns. But even when the meta doesn't suit him perfectly and his items and options aren't really that great, he's still a really safe blind pickable AD carry to play. Sometimes you do have to settle for weak side, but it's great because all you gotta do is E back to safety and keep yourself alive and ticking. But in those games where you're strong side, you have so much chase, so much poke, amazing damage and great snowballing too. And right now in this season, his spikes with just 2 to 3 items are as strong as ever. Ezreal has an amazing skill ceiling. I mean, he's pretty much exclusively skill shot based, so if you hit them, you're gonna win, and if you don't hit them, you're not really gonna do too much. Which obviously means understanding and practicing his skill shot ranges and practicing his combos is obviously going to be instantly rewarded. And it is a great feeling when you're really on top of those skill shots, you're firing those WQ combos, you're kiting with constant ease and reducing the ease with your Qs, getting cross map ultimates, stacking up that passive and weaving in autos around those Qs, and looking at those post game stats, dealing tons more damage than anyone else in the lobby. Well, let's move on to supports now, and first off we have to talk about Senna. Senna is such a unique support, but what an exceptional one she's been ever since her release. And she's been included in those patch notes time and time again, buffing and nerfing her soul stacking passive and trying to balance this absolute demon in the bot lane, dealing so much damage and having some of the best scaling in the game. Yes, Senna is the perfect support pick to play if you're actually a bit of a closet AD carry main. She has scaling auto attack range and damage, and she has fantastic lane bully potential too with that poke and sustain, not to mention also having a global ultimate. Now she is extremely fragile, and against aggressive lanes you need to poke them without getting caught. And half of learning and playing Senna is perfecting this playstyle and learning your limits and learning how you can stay alive but still be impactful. When we come back to that point about feeling how much time we've spent on a champion and how rewarding it is, Senna is truly up there. You need to understand and learn all of her different builds and how she can play into lots of different lanes. Speaking of which, is incredibly diverse. She can play alongside other AD carries, she can play alongside tanks like Tahm Kench, she can play with enchanters like Seraphine, and even mages too. Which means if she is one of your main support picks to play, you can play her alongside so many different lanes and matchups and still carry easily. Our second pick in the support role to main this season is Bard. And when we think about champions that are fun to play, then Bard is up there with some of the most enjoyable champions in the game. He genuinely has one of the most creative kits in the game, making him incredibly rewarding once you fully understand him. He has tons of ways to set up ganks and fights with magical journeys over walls, perfect ultimates lining up those wombo combos, and obscure angles to use your Q to lock down enemies, making them have no choice but to succumb to your teammates. So Bard isn't actually the best 2v2 support in the game, and he's all about his roaming and his playmaking that really separate the good Bards from the rest. Because if all you're doing is sitting in lane and lobbing out the odd Q, you're not really going to have too much impact compared to other 2v2 supports. But when it comes to getting around the map and setting up plays for your teammates, this is where a good Bard master really shines. There's also a bunch of different ways to build Bard too, so learning this is also part of maining him. You've got full tank with Trailblazer and Locket of the Iron Solari, you've got damage with Bloodsong and Imperial Mandate, and a bunch of other different items to go for too, like Frozen Heart and Kaenic Rooker. Bard is having an amazing season 2024 so far, boasting a really impressive win rate at almost every single rank in the game. And there's a good reason why the current rank 1 EU West is actually a Bard one trick, because he's just that good if you know what you're doing. From one playmaker to another, we've got Rakan. And in terms of meta resistance and consistently, Rakan is definitely up there with some of the best choices you can make. For the last few seasons, Rakan has been one of the best supports in the game to main, with him being just such a versatile pick into tons of different team comps, a bunch of different lanes, and a fantastic variety of matchups. This guy really does have it all. He has shields and sustain, he's got mobility, he's got engage, he's got disengage, he's got CC for days, and when you put all of this together, you realise just how effective this guy can be if the player behind him really knows what they're doing. Yes, Rakan has a super high skill ceiling, and the more time you play him, the more time you're practicing, the more you really understand just how much he can achieve in those big clutch moments. Rakan is so much fun to play, and it is so satisfying lining up a big ultimate into W5 man combo to engage those big fights for your team. When you compare him to other CC engaging supports, he does take a lot more practice, but once you have put the effort and the hours in, he becomes extremely fun, extremely satisfying, and extremely rewarding too. Speaking of satisfying, our fourth pick in the support role is Blitzcrank, the most notorious support in the game, known for those hooks that can win any game in any moment, even if you're behind. Blitzcrank is the perfect support pick to have in your arsenal when an enemy picks something easy with no mobility that you can farm and abuse on repeat. Blitzcrank works with a bunch of different AD carries but truly excels with those aggressive damage dealing ADs that want to snowball the lane phase and put the game to bed early. But even in games where this isn't the case, Blitzcrank can roam, he can gank other lanes, and even in the late game all it takes is one good hook to pick out a priority target and end the game there anyway. If you are thinking of maining Blitzcrank, you do have to be somewhat wary of his everlasting ban rate. It's not stupidly high because he's incredibly broken this season, it's just one of those supports that not everyone likes to play against. So when we talk about maining champions, we aren't necessarily saying one trick Blitzcrank, but having him in your pocket ready to go when the game allows it will 100% not be something you'll regret. Moving on to our fifth support today and our final champion to talk about in this video, it's Rel. Now if you asked us this a little while ago, Rel would not be someone we'd be suggesting for you to main. But after a bit of a mini rework last season, she's been one of the best supports you can play. So despite being an amazing pick, she still isn't the most popular support in the game, which means most of the time you'll be able to lock her in if you want to. Now Rel is all about huge engaging AoE CCing combos, which means if you pick her with the right AD carries like Samira or Draven, your ability to carry games from the bot lane is insane. So far in season 2024, she's performing really consistently just like last season, but slightly out of that super broken bracket, which means not many people are playing her and absolutely nobody is banning her. Now when we come back to that point of enjoying maining a champion, Rel is so much fun when you land those big AoE wombo combos. Finally, a great thing about Rel 2 is just how good and present she is across all sorts of different ranks. You can easily stomp those low elo lobbies with Rel and Misfortune, and in the right games and the right drafts, even in the highest of elos, she's still an amazing support to main. Well, that brings us to the end of our video all about the best champions for you to main for every single role so far in season 2024. If you want some help learning these champions with builds, matchups, runes, counters and more, then don't forget to head to mobalytics.gg and download our desktop app. Here we've got you covered with everything you need to know to get started with these champions, so you guys can get stuck in, start maining and learning these champions and really start to feel the rewards this season. Thanks everybody for watching, we hope you enjoyed this video and let us know in the comments below who you're maining so far this season. We'll see you all next time and as always guys, take care.